The 49ers have to be down to 53 on their roster tomorrow. Be a lot of interesting roster gymnastic. Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? We're going to talk about all that and more in this episode of 49ers Cutback.
From the alley-oops at Kezar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Time to try to figure out who's going to be on the San Francisco 49ers 53-man roster in 2024. And this is one of the most compelling conversations that's going on for sure when it comes to the 49ers. If you're like me, I'm sure you've seen some of the projections that are going on, by media members, and it is basically all over the place. Some have the 49ers keeping two quarterbacks, some have them keeping three, some have them keeping key veterans, some have them keeping just, a lot of the rookies. It is an interesting conversation. And of course, if you have me over on Patreon, you know that I did the full, pre-training camp projection, did all that stuff. I did a preseason one. There's been a lot of projections over there. But here I'm going to bring what I think is going to be the 49ers 53-man roster. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit more complicated. And of course, there's no way that I can be 100% accurate because I don't know the intricacies of injuries and some of those things that are going to play a huge part in this. The idea is to have a conversation and try to get this thing down to where it's pretty close. Now, the 49ers have started making some cuts as of the time of this recording. So guys like Matt Breida has already been cut. Deontre Kirkland has already been cut. So just for full transparency, I had stuff going on and I wasn't able to record until now. But I wanted to get it out there and have this conversation about who I believe the 49ers are going to keep on their team. And these are less about what I believe and more what I think the 49ers are going to do. But of course, with all things, you have your own opinion on things. And I think sometimes that will come into the content that you make. So I tried to do my best to be as unbiased as possible with actual reasoning for my decisions, but there's going to be some things that could change. There could be some trades. There could be some movement by the 49ers between now and the 1 o'clock deadline on Tuesday for the 49ers to get this roster exactly where they want it. So we're going to use the IR, we're going to use the PUP, and we are going to build the best possible 53-man roster, knowing that there's still question marks with guys like Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk, and we have to play all that into account. I'm also going to talk about key vested veterans who could be impactful in how the 49ers build this roster by potentially releasing them and then going ahead and bringing them back on Wednesday. So we're going to talk about all that in this episode. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From preseason NFL to college kicking off, Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor Pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, and get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. And what's interesting is I think, the rule came out now that the NFLPA vetoed possibility of a quarterback being on the practice squad and being able to be elevated unlimited amount of times. They vetoed that because they want more quarterbacks to be able to make the active roster. They don't want you to be able to stash a player. I don't think that really played into the 49ers scenarios anyways. Even though you had vested veterans with Josh Dobbs and Brandon Allen, and you could have easily told them, hey, we're going to bring you back. I think the 49ers like their quarterback room, and they don't want to run the risk of a team like Tennessee or another football team coming in and saying, you know what, we're going to offer you more money to come here. So the 49ers are going to keep three quarterbacks on their active roster in 2024, and that's going to be Brock Purdy, Josh Dobbs, and Brandon Allen. And I have Josh Dobbs just ahead of Brandon Allen as far as being backup quarterback, but that doesn't mean that's how Kyle Shanahan has it. I just feel that that's where Kyle will have it, just kind of seeing the way that he's done things in the past. He likes players that can extend plays as long as they can operate from the pocket. So I've got those two guys on the team. I've got Tanner Mordecai being cut. And I think that Tanner Mordecai has a shot to make the 49ers practice squad. Just normally, when you keep three quarterbacks on the active roster, you don't put a fourth quarterback on the practice squad. Just something to remember. I do think they like Mordecai. That's why I'm saying it's a possibility. But normally, roster building wise, because you're basically building a 70-man roster because you're going to have 17 practice squad spots because you're going to use Isaac Alarcon as one of those spots. He's from the International Pathway Program. So keep that in mind as well. The 49ers fielding a 70-man roster once you include those 17 practice squad spots. So let's move to running back. Quarterback was pretty self-explanatory and I think pretty easy if you know the 49ers are keeping three. And I think with the new rule that the NFLPA vetoed, it made it more clear. So I think some people that put the quarterback situation at two quarterbacks might change their mind now. Maybe they wouldn't, but those are the ones that I'm going with. Now, running back, Christian McCaffrey, of course, he's the best running back in the entire league. That's a no-brainer. And then I'm going to Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason, whichever order that you have them in. I don't have a desired order. I have 2A and 2B. Whichever one, I want to use them in certain scenarios. Jordan Mason on certain carries. I want to use Elijah Mitchell on certain types of runs because they're more successful in one than the other. And so I love having those two guys together. Then Isaac Guerendo, who earned his spot on the last preseason game. And I think it's interesting that, as a fan base, especially if you're on Twitter, you see that the constant aggravation with rookies, right? Rookies are not available for training camp. Rookies are not going to be who we think they're going to be. And then they get out there and they've been playing really well. We've seen it with Jacob Cowing. We've seen it with Isaac Guerendo. So there's been a couple of guys already that have come out and proved it. And in fact, 49ers rookies have looked really good. Guerendo makes his team probably going to help with the kick returns this season. Of course, I did see a lot of Debo and Kyle Juszczyk, but maybe now with Guerendo showing the explosiveness, the 49ers won't have to go that route. Or maybe they go Isaac Guerendo and Debo Samuel. That would force teams to kick it to Guerendo. They're not going to want to kick it to Debo. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward as far as kick return and the effect that Isaac Guerendo could have on special teams. And then, of course, Kyle Juszczyk, the best fullback in football, and he rounds out this 49ers roster with 5 running backs. So 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs so far. Lots of offensive weapons, and the 49ers keep them. And then, of course, they're going to have to cut Patrick Taylor, and they're going to cut Cody Schrader, which is tough. Cody Schrader had a good preseason. He had a good training camp. But I think when you look at the dynamic ability of a young rookie like Isaac Guerendo, you go Guerendo over Schrader. 49ers hope he clears waivers and makes it back to the practice squad. I know they would love to keep Cody Schrader, but there's a real possibility that somebody goes and picks him up. And we know they already released Matt Breida, so Breida will not be on the 49ers roster. And the 49ers putting him out there as part of the first cuts to give him an opportunity to land somewhere else. That's very nice by the 49ers, looking after one of their veterans. So well done by them. So 5 running backs for the 49ers. Wide receivers. Boy, is this one complicated. Because of Brandon Ayuk still holding out, we don't know the inner workings. If they know that Brandon Ayuk's playing week 1, then they might handle this wide receiver room differently. If they don't know he's going to play week 1, like maybe they're not as close to a deal as we're hoping, or he's not willing to play on his 5th-year option, because the rubber's meeting the road here. It's going to be game checks that he's going to have to lose. This could be different. But for right now, we're going to act like Brandon Ayuk is going to play week 1 against the New York Jets, and that's how we're building this thing out. Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, rookie Ricky Pearsall. He's going to start practice today. Jacob Cowing. And then I went like this with Chris Conley. I think Conley's earned a roster spot, but I have highlighted him as one of those vested veterans. We know that Chris Conley last year, the 49ers moved on from Conley, brought him back to the practice squad, and eventually elevated him. I'm not saying practice squad is the avenue for Chris Conley. What I'm saying is there's a possibility, and right now I have him making the active roster. There's a possibility they go to Conley if the Ayuk thing is not figured out and say, hey, Chris, can we let you go, bring you back Wednesday when we've made another roster move? Because they potentially might want to keep an extra wide receiver if something happens with Brandon Ayuk not being able to play. But right now, I think Conley's that guy. I think they feel confident with him and his blocking, confident with him as far as receiving it. A great catch in the week 3 matchup from Brock Purdy on a nice sidearm throw. I think Conley's addition and special teams help makes him the 6th guy, which makes it really tough because there's going to be guys you're going to cut that you really like. Guys like Ronnie Bell, Tay Martin, Danny Gray, Trent Taylor, and we already know Kirkland got cut as well. So you've got a really good group of guys. Danny Gray's likely going to be picked up. Maybe he'll come back to the practice squad. Same with Ronnie Bell. Those guys are going to get some interest around the league, but I don't think that they outplayed the guys in front of them. I thought that Danny Gray did a good job in week 2, showing that he could get one-on-one separation from cornerbacks, but then again, he didn't play in week 3. So I don't know what the deal is with Danny Gray as far as injury. That's part of the reason I put in the Chris Conley aspect is maybe they can put Danny Gray on IR again. Last year, they just never brought him back. They could potentially do that as well. So they have a receiver on reserve if that injury is something that's going to hold him out. I have no idea. That's why there's some shades of gray when it comes to building the 49ers roster. But I do think Conley earned it. I think he did earn this spot. So we're keeping 6 wide receivers on the San Francisco 49ers roster. Now let's get into tight end. And tight end is going to be an interesting one because we have some guys at the end of the position, some young guys that are going to make this thing a little bit interesting. So right off the bat, we know George Kittle's making this team. Eric Saubert has for sure earned the second wide receiver spot. Now, one thing that I found very interesting from listening to other beat writers and content creators making their 53-man roster is I haven't really seen anyone keeping Logan Thomas. And I wonder why. Logan Thomas signed the Thursday before the last preseason game. You're not bringing a player in on the Thursday before the last preseason game unless you intend to keep them for the regular season. What would be the point of signing him? You knew he wasn't going to play on Friday. So I don't understand why he hasn't been on the 53-man roster for other people. But I'm keeping him on the 53-man roster because I think that's what the 49ers are going to do. I think they signed him with the full understanding he's going to be a part of this roster. And so I think the 49ers have 3 veterans, George Kittle, Eric Saubert, and Logan Thomas at the top of this tight end room. And then they have to decide between Cameron Latu and Braden Willis. Well, if you got Eric Saubert and and Logan Thomas playing so much behind George Kittle, that 4th tight end is going to be inactive. So this is where it gets tough. I think Braden Willis has done better than Cameron Latu during training camp in the preseason. I don't think he's completely outshined Cameron Latu, though. I think when you look at receiving game, Cameron Latu has definitely got more upside than Braden Willis. But right now, Braden Willis is the better blocker, even though it hasn't been consistent. It's been good. When he comes out of the backfield, that's not the best aspect. But how much are you going to ask him to handle run plays out of the backfield as far as blocking when you got Kyle Juszczyk? So I think the San Francisco 49ers decide to keep one of these guys, and I think they're going to keep Cameron Latu. And the reason is I think the upside, the ability to catch the ball, the ability that he's just a bigger body, and I think he looks more the part. I think Braden Willis has played better. I want to make that clear. And I think that Latu, this would be, of course, a surprise to a lot of people, and this might not happen. It might end up being Braden Willis. I gotta be honest, but I think that Cameron Latu has the best chance of the two to get claimed on waivers. And so the 49ers would be taking a risk of losing one of these young guys, but maybe they want to wait a year for Cameron Latu. He would be able to practice all year. That's something he needs. And we've seen him make so much improvement from last season and even improvements from preseason game 1 to preseason game 3. So I think it's going to end up being Cameron Latu for the 49ers and not Braden Willis, which is really shocking. And, that's a tough decision to make. And it means that you're cutting Braden Willis Jake Tungus and Mason Pline. And I've always thought that Tungus was going to get waived. He'll probably revert and end up back on the 49ers practice squad. I think he's a good player. I think they like his versatility. In fact, I think he's done better than Braden Willis blocking out of the backfield, but he had time as a fullback playing for the Chicago Bears. So he's a little bit further along in that development, even though he's still a really young guy. With Mason Pline, he's just so raw, needs a lot of time. So we'll see what the 49ers do. I think if the 49ers have a choice, they're going to keep Braden Willis and Jake Tungus on the practice squad if they're allowed to. We could also see a trade. I don't know. Maybe we'll see one of these tight ends traded. Maybe even it'll be Cameron Latu. But I think the 49ers are going to go George Kittle, Eric Staubert, Logan Thomas, and Cameron Latu, with this remembering that if the 49ers need to create a roster spot, they have done this with tight ends in the past. They could go to Eric Saubert and say, hey, we need to let you go. We'll bring you back Wednesday where we've made a roster move. And then they put a guy like Braden Willis or Cameron Latu on the IR and potentially bring them back. It's a way to keep guys on your roster, insulate yourself in case you have an injury, then you bring those guys back. If not, you're okay. So that's always something to remember. The 49ers could use that plan. They used it with Tyler Kroft and were able to build their roster that way. So this is a position the 49ers do that, and I wanted to make sure I brought up the vested veterans the 49ers could use in that avenue. So that's potential for the 49ers to do. Offensive line, they're going to keep 9, I think. Trent Williams, of course, even though he's holding out, you have to have him on the roster so he doesn't lose the season. So it'll be Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Dominic Pooney, Colt McKivitz. Those are your likely starters. Then you have Jalen Moore as a swing tackle, Spencer Burford, who will be the first backup at right guard behind Dominic Pooney, and an insulation in case Dominic Pooney struggles. Don't expect it, but they really like Spencer Burford. Then Nick Zakelj. I think Nick Zakel's earned a roster spot, and with John Feliciano being on the IR, and I have him on the IR with a opportunity to return, he'll be designated for that pre-53-man roster finalization. So Nick Zakelj will take that role as the guy who can play left guard and center if needed. And then I've got the 49ers keeping young Jared Kingston on the roster. Do I think the run blocking's been good enough? No. But I've been trying to figure out a way for them to keep Kingston, and I think this is the way. Jared Kingston could be a big part of the 49ers roster moving forward with some of the depth concerns in 2025 and beyond. He did really good pass blocking. That's phenomenal. And so he's just got to get better at run blocking, which I think he can. He wasn't asked to do it a lot at Washington State. Didn't really start getting into it until last year at USC, where they did it a lot more. So I think with more time and more coaching from Chris Forster, he could be one of those guys that helps. What makes it difficult, though, is that means you only have Jalen Moore as one of those tackles. So we'll see what happens with Trent Williams. If Trent Williams is really ready, like Jeremy Fowler said, to sit out some games, the 49ers are going to have to adjust their decisions, and maybe they have to make a roster move post Tuesday. Because I think that they could cut Chris Hubbard and potentially just tell him, hey, we're bringing you back on Wednesday and making you a part of this active roster, and they can move Kingston or somebody else to the IR with the potential to bring them back down the road. Because the whole goal is not for Kingston to play in 2024, but to not lose him in 2024. So stashing players on IR, knowing you're not planning on bringing them back, is something the 49ers could definitely do, and that would be an avenue because guys like Chris Hubbard and Brendan Parker, the other tackles, don't have to come back or don't have to get claimed. They can come right back. So those are some guys that I'm watching to see if they might need to help the 49ers, especially if Trent Williams is going to hold out. Hopefully not. Hopefully they get this thing done. And maybe that's an idle threat to get the 49ers to move a little bit faster on the contract. I think they're very motivated to get it done. But look for Hubbard to potentially come back to the 49ers if he gets released. Tough cuts were Ben Barch. That's really going to be tough. Of course, Brandon Parker got cut. Drake Nugent is going to get waived, which means he could get claimed on waivers. I think Nugent did admirably during training camp. I think likely he will pass through waivers. If not, it could be he could get claimed, but he would have to be on an active roster. So I expect him to get waived and back. Isaac Alarcon, of course, I think he'll end up on 49ers practice squad as the International Pathway Program player. And then Sebastian Gutierrez, who had a pretty good camp as well. We'll see what happens with him. Barch, I don't know if they're going to get him to the practice squad or not. He might end up being gone. And that's tough, but Nick Zakelj outplayed him. And so that's who you got making it. So we've got 27 offensive players. You normally like it more balanced at like 25, but you have three running backs, three quarterbacks, five running backs, six wide receivers, four tight ends, nine offensive linemen. And this is just the original construction. Of course, things could change even from Tuesday to Wednesday and beyond as the 49ers make moves and get things done. It's always interesting. Now on defense. Gonna keep eight offensive linemen. And I started floating this idea last week. There's eight clear players for the 49ers to keep. And then I think after that, it's really muddied up. And I think the 49ers could get some of these players to the practice squad, use the promotion process to promote those players up for game day and get your extra player, whether it's an edge rusher or a defensive tackle. And that's something the 49ers can do. So I expect him to keep on the edge. Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Etor Gross-Matos, and Robert Beal Jr. And I know Robert Beal Jr. Has been getting criticized a lot, but I feel like his play has elevated every single week, which means with reps, the young player's getting better. And so the 49ers and Chris Kasarik are going to continue this process. And yes, is it a little bit nerve-wracking? It is. But you know what's happened? His run defense has gotten a lot better. He sets the edge a lot better. He tracks the ball a lot better. So maybe the pass rush will get there now. Now that he's getting more confident in the run game, he'll be able to kind of let himself go a little bit more during the pass game. So I'm excited about what Robert Beal could do. I think that there's a lot of work to be done there, and he's definitely not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, but he's the best option for the 49ers at fourth defensive end. One thing to monitor. We know it's likely Leonard Floyd will be ready for week one with him being day-to-day with the MCL sprain. But with Etor Gross-Matos being week-to-week, it's going to be something they have to evaluate next week. 49ers might have to elevate a defensive end off the practice squad for that reason alone. Now, of course, we know Drake Jackson's going to be on the PUP list. He's out for the year. Defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, Kevin Givens. Very good. If they had Kalia Davis, who's going to start the season on IR and then come back in the middle of the season, we would be talking about how deep this defensive tackle room was, because Kalia Davis looked great in training camp. He looked phenomenal in the first preseason game. So defensive tackle's not a concern for the 49ers, which made me feel a little bit more comfortable just keeping 8 for roster building reasons. This is going to fluctuate, but they have guys that they can get to the practice squad for sure. Tough cuts, of course, Alex Barrett, but he's been on the 49ers practice squad for several years now. Sam Okawanu, who I thought has played pretty good during the preseason once he got over his injuries, could be another guy that they end up getting to the practice squad. T.Y. McGill, we know he's been on the 49ers practice squad year in and year out over the last couple years, elevated and brought back. So McGill, obvious. Shaquille Brown, Evan Anderson, other guys potentially could go to the practice squad if they're not claimed. I don't think Evan Anderson had the preseason that a lot of people thought he was going to have. So I think there's a possibility he makes it and reverts back to the 49ers practice squad. So 8 defensive linemen help the 49ers create some roster spots on defense and on offense to potentially keep some other guys, because in other years they would have kept 9 or 10 defensive linemen. Don't do that now, but you have guys you can elevate to help your football team. 49ers normally roll with 9 active defensive linemen for game day. Linebackers, Fred Warner, Devondre Campbell, D. Winters, who's dealing with an ankle injury. So that's something to monitor and how the construction of this 49ers linebacker room is handled. Now, where it gets interesting at the end is what you're going to do with a guy like Curtis Robinson. He only has 3 vested seasons, which means he can be claimed on waivers. And there are teams around the league that would love to get their hands on a guy like Curtis Robinson. We know that last year when he was on the practice squad for the 49ers, he turned down an opportunity to go play in Tennessee with Azeez Al-Shire for Ran Carthon to stay on the 49ers roster. That loyalty, hopefully the 49ers are going to reward him. I have the 49ers keeping Curtis Robinson on this roster, and that means somebody's going to have to go. And I have them keeping Jalen Graham and Tatum Bethune. I have them keeping some young guys to go with Fred Warner and Devondre Campbell, and that means we know that the PUP list is going to have Dre Greenlaw and Adam cut DFF. Part of the reason Adam cut DFF, because I think there's a likelihood we could see the cuts come out and DFF makes the roster. But I did it because he has 5 vested seasons in the NFL. which means the 49ers know he doesn't have to clear waivers. Curtis Robinson does. So they could they could stash Tatum Bethune on the 49ers IR once they get past Tuesday and the official roster comes out. So it's more that roster building mentality of Kyle Shanahan saying, look, I don't want to lose any of my guys. Now, there's also a possibility, because they've done this before, that they're going to trade one of these linebackers. That could still happen. We'll see what happens. I just don't think they want to lose Bethune or Jalen Graham. So I went this way. Curtis Robinson makes the roster at DFF, gets released. But I think there's a likelihood that DFF ends up on this roster. I just, trying to figure it out without knowing what the trades could possibly be or what's out there. There's lots of players getting traded, especially linebackers, that this is a possibility. But yeah, DFF going with Fred Warner, Devondre Campbell, D. Winters. The injury makes it a little bit more muddied. Curtis Robinson, Jalen Graham, and Tatum Bethune. And that's it. Either Curtis Robinson or DFF are starting for you week 1 if D. Winters' ankle is bad. So that's going to be really tough. Cornerbacks, have them keeping 6. Tarvarius Ward, Deommodore Lenoir, Renardo Green, Isaac Yedem, Rock Ya-Sin, and Darrell Luter Jr. And this is a tough one. I think Ambry Thomas goes on the IR. Here's where I'm gonna kind of play it both ways, so everyone understands what could happen with Ambry Thomas. There's 2 ways the 49ers could do this. You've got a vested veteran in Rock Ya-Sin. You could go to Rock Ya-Sin and say, hey, look, you're going to be on our active 53-man roster. We want you on this team. What we're going to do, though, is we want to get Ambry Thomas to our IR. And just in case we need him, and we know he's dealing with the broken arm. And you could say, Rock Ya-Sin will bring you back Wednesday. Ambry Thomas goes on the IR on Tuesday after he makes the official 53-man roster, and you bring Rock Ya-Sin back. But they want Rock Ya-Sin on this team. And if they have to choose, they're keeping Rock Ya-Sin over Ambry Thomas. So Ambry Thomas is going to the IR either before the deadline tomorrow. And if that happens, he's done for the year with the 49ers. And they could, of course, reach an injury settlement, recoup some of that money. That could happen. Or they could wait until after the roster is finalized, then put him on the IR, creating a roster spot to bring a guy like Rock Ya-Sin back. That's something they could do. So both things are possible, but I think either way, Rock Ya-Sin ends up on the 49ers roster in 2024. And then, of course, Darrell Luter Jr. beats out Sam Womack and makes the 49ers team. I think Luter Jr.'s length, I think his size, I think the control that they have over him for this year and 2 more make him a little bit more enticing than Sam Womack. I think they'd love to get Womack to the practice squad. I think there's a likelihood somebody claims him because as a 5th, 6th cornerback, he's pretty good. Just the 49ers cornerback room is absolutely stacked. So Renardo Green and Darrell Luter Jr. are probably the future at the position. So you don't want to lose those 2 guys. So I expect Ambry Thomas to go to IR either before and have his season ended or after the 53-man roster is finalized. And then in that case, Rock Ya-Sin comes back. So that's how you can kind of use the vested veterans. I don't know how much the 49ers will do it. We've just seen them do it before. Kerry Hyder, Tyler Croft, they've let these guys go. They bring them back. Last year, Austin Bryant, same thing. So this is kind of a way the 49ers handle business to be able to get as many guys as they can on this roster. So 6 cornerbacks for most of the preseason. Before the preseason, I thought it was going to be 5. But now just with the way that Rock Ya-Sin and Darrell Luter Jr. kind of played at the end, I think they're going to make this roster. And I think the 49ers aren't ready to give up on Rock Ya-Sin. Now, safety, it gets interesting. You're keeping so many players at other positions. It makes safety interesting. Another thing that does is Kyle Shanahan's comments on Talanoa Hufanga. It's starting to look like Hufanga is not going to be ready for week 1. And if Hufanga's not ready for week 1, they're going to keep him on the PUP list. This is where I think the 49ers create a roster spot for these other players that we've been keeping. That's how you get an extra guy on offense initially. So I think what's going to happen is Talanoa Hufanga is going to stay on the PUP list. He'll go to the PUP reserved, and he'll stay on the PUP list, and he'll miss the first 4 games. Because of that, I have the 49ers keeping 3 safeties, and I'll explain why. But Jair Brown, Malik Mustafa, and George Odom, with Jair Brown and George Odom being the starting safeties. Then here's what you do. You go ahead and you cut Tracy Walker and Jalen Mahoney. And we know that whoever this is going to be the 4th safety. And that's how it's going. You're going Jair, George Odom, and Malik. Those are your top 3. Do I think Malik is ready to play right now in big-time games? No. But this is where you go ahead and you say, you know what, Tracy Walker, we're going to put you on the practice squad. You're going to be elevated for week 1. But I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to get a veteran safety. They're going to put them on their practice squad, and they're going to elevate them for week 1. That's how you kind of work around the practice squad and your normal roster to create a opportunity to keep somebody else at another position. And I think they can do it. I mean, Tracy Walker was out, out on the street, and they brought him in. I think he's did okay. And so having him come in, he's a good special teamer, and play as the 4th safety makes a lot of sense. Then you only have to carry 3 for the first few weeks. You'll only be able to elevate Tracy Walker for the first couple games, but the 49ers have done this before. You bring in other safeties, other veterans, or you go ahead and you elevate Jalen Mahoney. So the 49ers can play games with this practice squad and be able to kind of use the roster that way to make sure that you get the guys you need. So defense is 23 players on defense, 8 defensive linemen. We know that they'll put some on the practice squad elevation. Linebackers is 6. That's really tough. I think that could always be 5. They could create a roster spot there. Cornerbacks, 6. I don't think they want to lose Darrell Luter Jr., and the other guys have just been so good. They're going to have to figure that out. Safety's 3 because of Talanoa Hufanga going on the pup. If Talanoa Hufanga comes off the pup, well, then that means one of the cornerbacks or one of the linebackers is likely gone for the San Francisco 49ers, and they'll figure it out. So I think that's how you go with the roster. And then, of course, the specialists, Jake Moody, he's going to be the kicker. Mitch Wisnowski is going to be the punter. And Tabor Pepper is going to be the long snapper, which it shouldn't shock anyone. Those have been the specialists from the beginning. So it's an interesting list. 49ers have got a lot of things to try to figure out. But I think I was just trying to give a clear picture on some of the things that could happen. I think, there's always things that we just don't know, the inner workings of some of the money concerns, of course. If you get into some of the financials, it gets a little bit more complicated. And also just what trades are out there. Can the 49ers move off a player? Heard Matt Mayoko talk about trades potentially being an avenue. Maybe you don't want to lose a player that you're going to waive. You go ahead and you trade him for some sort of 7th-round pick or 6th-round pick and potentially get something back for a player you would have lost it by getting claimed on waivers. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think the 49ers are trying to figure this thing out. I don't think there's going to be anyone that's completely correct, and if they are, bravo, because there's just so many moving parts. But I think this is the closest that I could come from reading the tea leaves, and I'm sure you have a different opinion. It's hard to find everyone having the same opinion on these roster decisions, but I'd like to thank you guys all for coming through and checking out the episode. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. This episode was brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.